Hi, welcome to Eve's Creative Laboratory. I'm Eve, and this is a new quilt kit that I just received in the mail. It's from my fabric addiction. I wanted to start a new project. I've recently ordered several kits online. This one is called Brick Player Quilt Kit. It came with the backing fabric, and it was 50% off when I ordered it, so it only cost $74.99 for all of this. I believe this is enough to make the throw size quilt, and it's really simple. There's only two size fabrics. There's these bricks and squares, and they just alternate every other one. So this is gonna go together really fast. And after my last project, I feel like I need something really quick just to do and to finish quickly. So it comes with this pattern. The pattern's called Brick Player. I'm gonna chain piece everything. And so one brick to one square and press everything to the square. Then I'm gonna lay it out to mix up the different colors because all of the same colors are right in a row here. So as I'm piecing it, they're not gonna be mixed up yet. So it came with the backing fabric, and it came with pre-cut binding. This is 2.5 inch binding. So I'm gonna get started.
If you need a repetitive sewing project, this is it. I just kept sewing and sewing and sewing and was able to just relax with this repetitive motion. I wanted to leave all of this footage in just so that you could see all the different colors that I have and how many of each color that there are. I think this is the fun part where you can see how I'm trying to randomize all the colors, which is kind of hard when I'm laying them down. I had to switch a bunch around. And then I also had to make sure that I had the correct number of columns and rows to sew together in the final quilt. In this portion, I'm sewing together 4 patches with these pairs, and the top of each column I marked with a pink post-it note. So you can see those pink post-it notes coming up, and that just indicates that it's the top of the next column. Here I'm just finger pressing all of them so that they're easy to iron. Now I'm just sewing the 4 patches together to make 8 patches, and then so on and so forth until I get all of the columns sewed together. And here I am sewing the columns together. And I'm taking my time because I'm trying to match up the corners as best I can as I'm sewing. This is how I sandwich. I put my backing fabric down, and then I lay my batting or wadding on top of that, and then I center up my quilt top and just make sure that there's no folds or creases underneath, and then I start basting it with the safety pins from the center going outward. This took me 2 days, or I had a break in between. You can tell I changed clothes in between. I guess I should mention that I work a normal job during the day, and so I don't have large chunks of time to spend quilting unless maybe it's in the evenings or on the weekends. So I just do this kind of stuff when I have the time for it. You can tell I have other people trying to go through the living room here. Both my kids are asking me about something, I think. So I'm trying to do this while kids are doing their own thing. And now I'm just cutting off the excess. I think I'm using my sewing shears to do that. And now I am basting using a large stitch length just around the edge, so I'm tacking down all 3 layers together, and I left about a 1/4 inch of batting around the edge just so that I can trim it off at the last minute after I'm done quilting in order to put the binding on.
I don't know if you could see exactly what I was doing from the other angle, so I switched the view. What I'm doing right now is I'm basting the edges. After I laid everything flat and I sandwiched my quilt and I pinned it, so I already have pin basted it, but I like to thread baste the outer perimeter. This helps make it easier to put the binding on at the end. And I've said in other videos, but if you're new here, thank you for joining me. And I personally like to thread baste the edge very close to the edge of the top. So maybe about 1/8 of an inch from the edge up to maybe a 1/4 inch, because that way I don't have to take any of the basting out when I'm putting the binding on. I just sew right over it and it works out great. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm thread basting the perimeter of my quilt sandwich. So I'm hoping that you can see better from this side. I already increased my stitch length to the longest stitch length that my machine does. On my machine, it's a 6. And so I'm just using white thread and I just stitch like this, right along the edge. And then when I reposition, because I've already pinned the exterior, well, I've pinned the whole thing, but I reach down to the next pin here and just make sure all the layers of fabric are still together, that there's not one that's kind of folded or anything in the back. And I just hold it straight. I'm not pulling it. I just hold it straight so that it can stitch real straight, because the edge of the fabric is a little bit wavery. Sometimes I will use my stiletto if there's a piece of stretched fabric or if the edge of the fabric is uneven. I'll hold it down with my stiletto like this so that the fabric stays down and the needle can just sew right over it like this. And every once in a while I just reposition the fabric so that it's still sewing straight. And I let the feed dogs take all layers of the fabric through. I just don't want this layer to flip over and get sewn by the needle the wrong way. So that's what the stiletto helps do. I don't know if you can see how the white fabric is kind of stretching right here. So this is a time that it's good to use the stiletto so that the fabric doesn't continue stretching. And it just stitches right down there. And now I can just stitch straight here. Then I just straighten the fabric, make sure all the layers are still together, reach down to the next pin, and then continue to sew straight. And at the corner, I'm just going to pivot. And continue going down. I like to rest the weight of the rest of the quilt on my lap so it's not tugging on the needle and the feed dogs as it's trying to pull. And then as it's sewing, I lift up maybe 10 to 12 inches of the fabric so that there's no tension on the needle or the feed dogs and it can just do its thing. that's done. Now it's ready for hand quilting. So I'll show you how I'm going to do that next. Okay, I'm back. What I'm going to do now is make the binding. I can't remember exactly where I left off previously, but I'm ready to bind now. I've trimmed off the edges of my quilt sandwich because I finished hand stitching it. Actually, I'm going to show you that in just a minute. But now I'm going to make the binding. And so I have these strips of binding already cut. They came in the kit that way. And what I have to do now is pin them together at a 90-degree angle. And I don't want to get the selvage in there, so I'm leaving this selvage to the side. And we want to pin right sides together. So really what I want is this part right here. And the selvages I'm leaving outside of the line because I'm going to end up trimming them off. So pin the right sides together, and I'm only using the cutting mat because I want to make sure that I'm pinning it at a 90-degree angle so it folds correctly. So once it's pinned, then we want to make a diagonal line from corner to corner like this. So I'm going to be sewing across this line, and then this will fold open this way, and it will end up being a continuous strip once this is sewn together. I'm leaving lots of space between the pins because I want to leave room for my walking foot when I sew so that I don't have to unpin as I'm sewing. I'm going to unpin after, I think. Now I'm going to sew all of these and press them flat. Now I can take out all the pins. And now I'm going to press these like this. And I'm going to press the seam open and then trim off these edges. All right, here is my finished quilt that I hand quilted. So I hand quilted inside all of the white squares on the whole thing. And I had previously done a basting stitch. I don't know if you can see right here around the edge. So I did a very long stitch on my sewing machine all the way around the edge, and I just cut the edge off. So you can see there's a little batting sticking out right there, but I used my mat, my cutting mat, and my rotary blade to cut all the way around the edge like this. So I've done that, and now I need to add the binding on, but I think I'm going to try adding the binding on by hand. Well, not completely. I'm going to sew on the initial strip of binding with my sewing machine, and then when I flip it over, I want to finish the binding very close to this stitch here. So I want to be able to see that. So I think I'm going to sew the binding onto the back side and then flip it around toward the front and then finish it by hand this way, so I can make sure that I'm sewing it very evenly and it's not going to overlap my hand stitching on the front. So I'm going to do that all the way around. I turned over the quilt, so this is the back of it, and I am clipping on my binding. I'm tacking this edge down just to tack it down, but I used 2 clips to show where I begin sewing because I want a flap open to connect the 2 bindings at the very end. So I'm just clipping it all the way around the edge. I have
the rest to go. And then I'm going to sew it on by machine. When I sew it on by machine, I'm using a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's a little bit more than what I normally would do for piecing the quilt top. All right, I've sewn on the binding strip to the back side. I left a gap at the end, about a little more than a foot. Now, I think this is the trickiest part. We have to cut this so that I can sew it together, but I don't want to cut it too short. Let me see if I can remember how to do this. Okay, if I want it to meet right here, then I need to cut this. That's right there. And then this would line up right there, but I can't cut it there. I have to cut it one width away from that. And I can't see my mark now. So I have to cut this one width away, which is right here. So from there, so I have to do right sides together like this, right? So I want to sew here, I think. No. Okay, let me see. Okay, I'm not gonna cut it just in case I mess this up. I'm just gonna sew it and then see what happens. All right, let's see if it works. All right, moment of truth. I always mess this up. See, it's too, no, I did it too close. Okay, let's redo this. Oh my gosh, what if I had cut that? It could have been way worse. I just have to re-sew it now. This. Okay, where did I mark this? Okay, this was too close, so I need to mark it. So instead of sewing here, I'm going to sew from here to here. Okay, between there. Why can't I just do this right the first time? This here. Now it will work. Hope I didn't twist it or anything. Okay, redo. Cha-ching. That's good. Now I can press this open and then let me finger press it. I'm not gonna get my iron out. I'm just gonna finger press this and I'm going to trim it. I like to trim a little bit more than 1/4 inch away. There's that and this and there. So I'm just gonna close this all the way there. Now I'm going to fold it this way, like this, toward the front, and then I'm going to hand finish it. And see, I don't want to cover up my hand stitches, so when I fold it over, I made a little pencil mark. I just want to barely cover that, so it's going to get bound like this. And I'm going to do that all the way around, so I'll show you when it's done. I'm just going to show you a little bit of how I'm stitching up the binding by hand. So I sewed it onto the back and I flipped it over to the front side, and I'm sewing it right along my hand quilting line here. So I don't want to overlap this. And some of them get kind of close, but I'm going to make this about 1/8 inch away, maybe. So I've just been, I don't even know if this is how you would hand stitch binding on. I've never done it before. But let's see, can you see? The thread is coming out right here, and I'm just putting my needle down right under that point and bringing it up right along the edge here. And I'm making sure it's not poking out on the back side. So I'm just doing this, which I think is a whip stitch, but I don't know. And I'm on the last edge. So this is the 4th edge that I'm stitching on right now. See, and you can barely see it right there. Just a teeny little stitch holding the edge of this binding down. I really like it. I really like it because this is very invisible. And it's
much more invisible than sewing it by machine. So I might actually do this from now on. I really like this effect in comparison to machine quilting this on, or machine stitching this on, I should say. Can you even see these little stitches along this edge here? They're a little gray. You can see it a little bit. But for the most part, it's invisible. I really like how it's turning out. And then let me show you a corner. Here's a corner. I mitered it. So on the back, you can see the bulk is on this side, the way it folded over. So on the back, the bulk is on this side. So on the front, I folded this side over, so the bulk is on this side. So when, it's about even when you squish it down. And these are threads from sewing the binding on. So I'll take those off. But I really like how the corner came out. See that this got stitched a little bit closer to that. Yeah, this edge is quite close to my hand stitching for the quilting. But the corners came out really nice. So I'm just going to continue sewing this on, and I use my clips to clip a few squares down like this. Oops. Just to hold the binding in place while I hand stitch this way, and then as I get to a clip, I'll remove it and just move it further down here, right there. So I'm gonna finish this, and then I will show you how it all looks at the very, very end. All right, this is the final reveal. I finished sewing on all my binding by hand, and I put this through the wash, and it came out so nice and soft and crinkly. Love it. Sorry, let's see if it will focus. My hand stitching, I'm loving hand quilting now. I think this looks so cool, the whole thing. And then on this corner, I put my little label. Can you see? By my creative laboratory. I have these little satin ribbon labels that are really soft, and I just stitched it on all the way around. And this is it's light, but it's warm. It's cotton batting on the inside. And these white squares are a little bit, I don't know, they're a little canvasy compared to this other fabric, but it works really nice together. It feels really nice, and it's so soft after I washed and dried it. So this project is done. I'm really happy with it, and this is encouraging me to do more hand quilting projects. So I hope you enjoyed it. At the beginning, I can't remember if I said it, but I was contemplating possibly putting a white border around the edge, but I didn't quite have enough of the binding fabric, so I didn't bother putting a border around. So this is done. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your liking and subscribing.